All right. So yeah, we also had some sound issues. Hopefully everything is solved now. If I can get some confirmation. All right. Okay, we seem to be live now. Our apologies for the streaming mishap earlier. It happens when you're doing live stuff. Hopefully everything is fixed now. Let us know in the chat if the sound, the video, everything works properly. So again, good evening. Welcome to an Envato Tuts Plus live stream. I'm Adi Purdila, and today it's all about Bootstrap, right? The very popular front-end framework or component library, whatever you want to call it. So, excuse me, recently Bootstrap has launched version 4, which came with a whole bunch of new changes. Some of the components got replaced by others. There were some new very big additions, like the implementation of Flexbox as default, and some other rather big changes. I also did a tutorial on Envato showcasing like the biggest changes that I considered in Bootstrap 4. So I'll have someone link that in the chat so you can follow along. Now, for this particular stream, instead of just going through these changes, I decided to do something a little bit different and build something with Bootstrap, with this new version 4. So the stuff that we're gonna build is this. It is a landing page. This is the finished product. Yeah, it's a very simple landing page, but in creating this, we're going to use a lot of Bootstrap components, but we're also going to write a couple of custom styling and custom JavaScript for it. So we're going to split this stream in 4 parts, and at the end of each part, we're going to take a quick break so we can have a sip of water. Maybe you guys can grab some coffee, and you can use that time to post your comments in the chat or your questions in the chat, and I'll do my best to answer all of them. So let's kick things off with a little bit of a project preparation. So I have a blank page set up right here, and I'm going to be using my code editor of choice, which is VS Code, Visual Studio Code. If you want to follow along, you can do so. We're not going to use any kind of Sass or any kind of complex techniques to demonstrate this. Instead, we'll just go with pure CSS, and we'll do things as simply as possible so everyone can follow along. So you can either use a code editor like I'm doing, or maybe you prefer CodePen. That's totally fine as well, but I'm going to be using a code editor. And I have a simple project structure set up here, just a custom CSS file, just some images that I prepared in advance, some custom JavaScript that we're going to write, and then the notes here just contain a list of the sections and the content for each section. And then finally, it's the index.html, which we'll use to write our entire page. So the first thing we have to do is start by adding the beginner HTML, or the starting HTML. Now, I have a snippet here that I can use, but if you don't have that, you can actually head over to the Bootstrap website, go to the documentation, and you can actually find a starter template right here if that's what you want to use. And it contains basically every reference that you need. It references the CSS and also the JavaScript. So this is the quickest way to start. So I'm going to simply copy this. I'm going to paste it in my document here. And we're ready to go basically. I'm just gonna change the title here. I'm gonna delete this, and I'm gonna do two things. So just so that I don't forget, I'm gonna load my custom CSS. So I'll have a link linking to my custom CSS file, and then I'm also going to link my custom JS here. So I'll have a script, and the source is going to be js/custom.js. All right. So first thing on the list is, do excuse me, please. I had a cold recently, so please do excuse my occasional cough. We're going to start by creating our nav bar. So for the nav bar, we can start writing it from scratch, or we can check out the Bootstrap documentation. So you can find the nav bar here, and also with a bunch of examples here. Now, if you want to start from scratch and create your own, that's probably the easiest way. Otherwise, simply copy the code from here. I'm going to start from scratch because it's the easiest for me. So we're going to create a nav with a class of nav bar and also fixed top. And also let's give it an ID of main nav. All right, inside I want to display two things. I want a logo and I want a navigation. So for the logo, Bootstrap actually offers us a special class called navbar brand. So I'm going to create an anchor tag with the class of navbar brand, and that's going to link to index.html. And then inside, I'm simply going to put an image that links to my logo SVG, and I'm going to give it an alt of logo. So let's check it out. All right. Next, for the navigation, I'm going to create a UL, and I'm going to give it a class of nav. And that class of nav, we're going to have, we'll have 3 list items, which will eventually navigate to the various sections in the page. So I'm going to say list item with a class of nav item times 3, and inside I'm going to have an anchor tag with the class of nav link. Again, these are Bootstrap classes. I'm not adding anything of my own. So the href for this features, which will eventually be the ID of the section that we want to jump to. We'll also give it a text, and then we have pricing. Of course, with a hash sign in front, pricing, and finally testimonials and testimonials, right? All right, and that is the navigation. And Bootstrap, of course, aligns everything. It sets everything up, so it's really easy to quickly build these pages. Right, and that's the nav bar. Finally, let's see. It seems I am echoing. For some reason. Let me check my settings. Okay, how about now? Am I echoing now? I should be all right now. Okay, I'm just going to move on, and you guys can tell me in the chat if I'm still echoing. So let's move on to creating our hero area. And as you can see, we have quite a bit of content in here. We have this left side, which contains basically a main statement, a secondary statement, and a list of benefits. And the right side, well, this is the left, this is the right side, it contains our main call to action. So we have a form which grabs name, email, address. So to create that, we're going to use the Jumbotron class. So Jumbotron class, or Jumbotron component, I think it's more correct. It basically creates something like this, a component with padding and special styling for the content inside it. And we start with a div class Jumbotron. All right, let's jump back in here. So let's see, Jumbotron. And then inside, we're going to use, let me just do this. We're going to use two columns, basically. We're going to use the grid system with two columns, one containing this content on the left, one containing the content on the right. So we're going to start with the container. The container class is used to create a wrapper basically for your content, and depending on the screen width, it's going to be either fluid or it's going to have a fixed width. So inside the container, we're going to use the grid. To do that, we'll start with a row, and then inside the row we're going to add our columns. So I'm going to have a div with a class of col LG8. I'll explain what LG stands for in just a little bit. And then plus div with an idea of col LG4. All right, this basically creates 8 columns, sorry, and then 4 columns. The LG stands for the breakpoint, which means only create this separation on large screens and higher. On smaller screens, these will be 100% width. So on this side, let's see what we have to create. We have the title, subtitle, and the list of benefits. So we'll do this. H1. Now, instead of the regular H1, I'm going to add a class of display, if I can type, display4. And display4 will just make the text a little bit bigger. You can find these styles under typography here. Oops. So typography, right? Here is a normal H1. And here are the display settings, right? Display 1, 2, 3, and 4. So display 4, and I'm just gonna copy and paste the text, so this will all go faster. And then I'm gonna use an H3 with the class of font weight light. This is a utility class for typography provided by Bootstrap that just changes the font weight to light. And also, I'm going to add another utility class called text muted. This will change the color of that text to a more muted tone. So in here, it will basically say something like this. All right. Next, let's see about that list of benefits. So I'm going to say UL list unstyled because I don't want any kind of bullets or anything like that. And then inside, I'm going to have 4 list items. So list item times 4. This is an Emmet extension, by the way, for Visual Studio Code, which just allows me to write shorthand code like this and then expand it into the final markup. So each list item will contain an image that's sourced to img icon checkmark svg. Yeah, let's also give it an alt icon. Okay, that should do it. Okay, and then inside I'm gonna paste the text for all of those features. I'll make sure to leave one space here between the text and the actual icon. All right, that should do the trick. Let's have a look in the browser, see what we got. All right, so that's starting to take shape. We have the title, subtitle, and list of benefits. Of course, it doesn't look like this yet. This is where we'll add some custom styling in the final section of this stream. Now let's move on to the section on the right, which contains the form with the main call to action. So inside this element, we're gonna use the new component in Bootstrap 4, which is a card. So if you've used Bootstrap version 3, for example, you might be familiar with the panel and well components. Well, those were removed and they got replaced with the card component, which is like an all-encompassing component, which also has a lot of flexibility. So I'm gonna create a div with a class of card and also text dark. This is another utility class that prepares the card to signalize. Signalize, is that a word? It basically tells the card to display dark text. There we go. So inside the card, we have two components, card header and card body. The card header will have an H5 and an H6. So the H5, I'm going to give it a class of card title, and it's going to say start your free trial, and the H6 is going to have a class of card subtitle and also text muted. And the text will say no credit card required. All right. Now, inside the card body, we'll have a form. So we'll say form. We're not really interested in the action right now, but we want to display basically two groups of elements. So we have a label plus an input, label plus an input. A pair like this is organized into a form group. So form group, and then inside we'll have label plus input. The label is going to be for, let's say, name here, and this will be an input type text. We'll give it a class for proper styling. We'll give it a class of form control and also an ID of name. So whenever you click on the label, the input will be selected. And then let's add a placeholder that says enter your name. We'll do the same for the email. Wrong shortcut there. We'll do the same for the email. So this will say email address, and the type here will be email. Class form control, that's the same, and the ID will also change this to email, and we'll update this as well. Finally, we'll add a submit button. So we'll say button. The type is going to be submit, and we're going to use some Bootstrap classes for the buttons. Now, to create a button, you simply add the btn base class, and then if you want, you can add a modifier class. In my case, I want a btn primary and a btn large. And also what I can do is say another utility class, w-100. This stands for with 100%. Bootstrap created these utility classes that are just so easy to remember and so easy to use, and they're really, really useful, and w100 is one of them. The text, simply start your free trial. All right, and finally, we have a card footer, and the card footer will basically have a paragraph that says in small text, and I'm just going to copy the text here. All right, and that should do it. Let's have a look. Yeah, that is the card. So again, we have the card header, the card body, and the card footer. And with that, we've actually finished the initial markup for our hero. Of course, we need to add a little bit of styling. There are a bunch of classes that we need to add to properly align all of the elements in here, but we'll get to those in the final section. Now, we're going to take a just a quick breather, a 1-minute break. I'm going to have a sip of water. You guys can enter your questions in chat if you have any, and we will be right back. Okay, welcome back. This is part 2 of the stream. Apparently you don't have any questions yet. That's totally fine. Let's move on, and we'll move on to creating the features section. Let's go ahead and do that. So for the features section, let's have a look at the result here. What do we have? A title, subtitle, and then a bunch of features that have each an icon, title, and a description. And this is center aligned, so let's keep that in mind. Now, I'm gonna go right over here, and I'm gonna start actually with a section. I'm gonna give it an ID of features, and I'm doing that so that it can be navigated to from the nav bar that we created in part 1. And inside, I'm going to start with a container, and then an h2. Now for the h2, I'm going to add the class of text center. This is another utility class that's used to center text. Very, very straightforward. Let's see, a complete package, and then an h5 for that subtitle that you saw, also with a class of text center, but I'm also going to be adding the class of text muted. And let's go ahead and add the class of font weight light. And this one is a larger or a longer text, so I'm just going to copy and paste this. All right. Next, let's see how we're going to approach this. So we basically have a grid pattern here. We're going to divide this in columns, equally sized, and each column will have a media object. This is yet another component from Bootstrap. So we're going to start with a row, and inside the row, I'm going to create a col LG. That's it, without any kind of number. Now, when you're doing this, you're basically saying that I want a column that's gonna fill all the available space, starting from large screens and above. So inside the column, I'm gonna create a media object. And again, you can go to the Bootstrap documentation, you can search for media object, and you'll have all the information that you need right here. So for media object, start with a div class media, and inside, I'm going to create an image. For the source, I'm going to say img icon clock. Don't worry, we're going to duplicate these in just a little bit. So you add your image, and then you, for the actual content, you add a div with a class of media body. So for media body, I'm going to have the title, which is an h5, which in the case of the first feature is going to say timer technique, and then a simple paragraph, which will say something like this. I could have used lorem ipsum here. It would probably have been easier, but I wanted some well, kind of real content in here. So what I'm going to do now is simply duplicate this div 3 times, and I'm simply going to change the paths to the icons. In this case, we need an icon invoice. The title is going to say fast invoicing. And I'm just going to copy the text. On this one, we're going to have icon checklist. And the title is going to say something like comprehensive time log. inside the description, and then the last one is going to be icon dash board. The title will simply say dashboard, and as usual, I'm going to quickly copy and paste the text. All right, so let's see if this works. Let's give it a go. All right, so we have the media object. Here we have all of our columns. But actually, I forgot to add another row here. So the first row should contain 2 columns, right? So I should end it right here. And I'm going to start another one, div class row. Okay, so they're now displayed on 2 rows, 2 columns each. All right, for now, that's it for the features. Let's move on to the secondary call to action, which is this bit. Now, for this, we're also going to use a card. So, jumping back in here. We're going to start with a container, and then inside a card, I'm going to add the class of bglight. This is another utility class that adds a background color. And also text center. This will center the text inside. And then for the card body, I'm simply going to use an h2 with a class of font weight light. And let me just copy and paste the actual text. And then I'm going to create a button. href is going to go to the top. And actually, let's go and add an ID of top to the body element, so that whenever I click this, it's just going to take me back to the top and I'll have access to my main call to action here. Okay, so I think we need to add some classes here. Class, simply btn and btn primary. Oops. Okay. And the text, start your free trial, should work just fine. Let's give it a shot. All right. That is our secondary call to action. Cool. Okay, what's next? Let's take a look. It's the pricing section. All right. So for the pricing section, we're going to create a section element with an ID of pricing, because this also plays into the whole navigation. And then inside, again, we'll go with the container. And then we'll have an h2 with a class of text center. And actually, you know what? This is exactly the same as this. So let's not waste time. And let's copy and paste. So I'm just going to change the text here, pricing, and the text for the subtitle. Okay. Now, for the actual pricing table, we're not going to use a table, obviously. This is 2018. Instead, we're going to use cards. Now, Bootstrap has something very interesting on cards called card deck. Let's see. There we go. Card decks. Now, card decks basically creates a set of equal width and height cards. And they look something like this. It's really simple to use. Just add a parent with the class of card deck, and then your cards as normal. So under this, we'll say div class card deck, and inside we're going to have a card with a class of text center. Let me expand that. And then the card body will look something like this. It's going to have a title, H6. Let's add the class of text uppercase, yet another utility class for typography, which changes the text to uppercase. And inside, I'm going to say solo. Then I'm going to add an HR. This is a separator, horizontal rule. Paragraph. Let's add the class of H2. This is very interesting because normally to create an H2 element, you would use the H2 tag. But if you want the heading 2 styling, you can do that in Bootstrap. You can simply add the class of H2 or H1 or whatever it is. And also font weight bold, another utility class. This will contain the actual price. And then we'll have a paragraph, small, M for emphasis. Oops. There we go. Per month, billed annually. Okay, let's close this paragraph, and then we'll have another paragraph for the actual description of the pricing plan. In our case, it's single-use license, best suited for freelancers. All right. Now, what I'm going to do is simply copy this bit 2 times. 1, 2. And I'm going to change the title, price, and description. The next int here is agency. It costs 14, and it says single use. No, it doesn't say that. It actually says this. And the third one is called company. It's at a whopping price of $59, and it says something like this. All right, so let's see what we have. There we go. So you see just how easy it is to create these kinds of components with Bootstrap. They already have the styling for everything. Basically, you just write the code, add your content, and that's it. And of course, these will automatically have the same height as the tallest one. So if, for example, I were to just duplicate this a bunch of times, yeah, you'll see that all of the other cards will have the exact same height as the tallest card in the deck. Really, really useful. And of course, this is possible thanks to Flexbox. And let's actually redo this bit. All right. So that was the pricing area. Now, this is the second section. Let's see what we have so far. Yeah, we have the nav bar, we have the hero area done, we have the features, secondary call to action, and pricing. Now, let's take just a 1 minute break and see if we have any questions. All right, we're back. Let's see if we have any questions. We do have one from Israel Colazzo. I seriously apologize if I butchered your name. Is there a BS4 code snippet extension for Atom, Sublime, and or VS or Visual Studio? There probably is. I actually don't know. Let me check this. So Bootstrap 4. Apparently, yes, there are. There is a Bootstrap 4 Font Awesome 4, Font Awesome 5 probably, snippets that you can install. Yeah, there is one. So if you're in VS Code, simply open the extensions and search for Bootstrap 4. Apparently there is another one here. Yeah, so there seems to be snippets for that. I'm not sure about Atoms and Sublime since I don't really use those code editors. And I'm actually show you my screen because I've been I forgot to change the scene here. So yes, again, go to VS Code, extensions, search for Bootstrap 4, and you'll see these two snippets right here, or these two plugins that you can install. All right. Any more questions at this time? It doesn't look like that, so we'll just move on to section number 3. Now, in section number 3, we'll build basically the rest of the page. We have the testimonials, we have this secondary call to action, and we have the footer. So let's start with the testimonials. I'm going to add a section again with the ID of testimonials, and don't worry about the nav bar. We'll make it work very soon. We'll actually make it scroll smoothly to each section. And then inside we'll use a container, and on H2 with a class of text center. Yeah, that should do it. Let's see, that text should be something like this. And then here's where things get interesting. I think this is one of the more complex components that we're going to build. And that's because we're kind of using generic Flexbox components to create something custom like this. So to do this, I'm going to jump to the let's see, Flexbox or Flex. I think it's under Flex Utilities here. Yeah. So under Flex Utilities in the Bootstrap documentation, you'll find that you can enable Flex behaviors or Flexbox behaviors to basically any container by simply adding the class of dflex. That stands for display flex. There are also classes for display block, for example, which say dblock, but for now we're focused on the Flexbox ones. All right, so by using these, you can basically create Flexbox containers, and you can then align the elements inside those containers in any way that you want. So in my case, I want basically 2 media objects on each side of each Flex component, and then I want those items aligned on the bottom in this first section and on the top in this second section. So we're going to take things slowly, and we're going to start with a div class D LG Flex. This basically means that I want display flex only on large screens and above. Now inside, I'm going to create a media object, and I'm going to give it an image first of all. the source is going to be, let's say male 1, portrait. And then for the media body, we're going to use a card. So card, BG light, and then the card body will simply have a block quote. And the block quote, I'm actually going to give it a class of block quote. This is necessary in order to be styled properly. The block quote, I'm going to add a paragraph that says something like this, and then a footer. I'm going to give it a class of block quote footer, and inside it's going to be the author. All right, so let's see what we have. Okay, we have a media object, basically, with this element aligned to the top. Now, let's go ahead and create another media object. And I'm simply going to duplicate this. And that media object will start with the media body first, and then it's going to have the actual image. So the image is placed on the right of the testimonial. So inside this media, we're going to switch things up a little bit. The card is going to have a BG dark, again another utility class that adds a dark background, and text white. This creates white text on a dark background. So the card body, well, I'm simply going to copy that paragraph here. Oops. And the author. And then the image will just link to female 1. And one thing that we can do already is add a class of rounded. That's gonna round off the corners of the images. Now let's do the same here. Class rounded. Okay, let's have a look. All right, that looks pretty good. Now, let's actually align these items to the bottom. And to do that, I'm gonna use classes on the actual images. So on the first image, I'm gonna use the class of align self LG end. This means that on large screens and above, that image is going to be positioned at the bottom. And I'm actually going to copy the same class and add it to this. So align self LG end. So now both of these are positioned on the bottom. But I also want these block quotes or these cards to be aligned on the bottom. For that, we're going to go to our dflex container, and we're going to add the class of align items LG end. So again, on large screens and above, it's going to align all of these items to the bottom. This is all thanks to the amazing power of Flexbox. Now, for the second row, we're going to actually copy this class right here, this flex container. I believe it ends right there. Yeah, that should do it. So I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm just going to change the images. So this will actually link to female 2, and we don't actually need this class because I want these to be aligned at the top. And let's see, block quote, it's gonna be BG dark text white, kind of creating a zigzag pattern. Let me just add that text there. And on the fourth one, yeah, it's going to be simply BG light here. And let's copy the text. This is taking a bit longer than I expected. I should have gone for just plain old lorem ipsum, but I don't really like that text, so I wanted to change it up a little bit. For this, we'll just go with male 2, which is our last remaining image, and of course we don't need this bit either. And also I'm going to remove the align items LG end here, because I don't want them aligned at the bottom. I want them aligned at the top. All right, and this is the final result. Now we need to add some spacing here, but we'll do that in the final section of this live stream. For now, we'll consider this to be complete. Let's quickly go over the final 2 elements of our page, which is the CTA and this footer. So for the CTA, let's see. We'll start with a container, and then let's actually align everything to the center. We're going to have an H2. Oops. It says start a free trial. And then an H5 with the class of text muted, and also font weight light. Yeah, that should do it. And it should say no credit card required. There we go. Finally, we need that button and ahref. I want it to go to the top. So the idea is that we have that main call to action at the top of the page, and then we have all of these secondary call to actions, and we don't want them to go anywhere else. We want them to scroll us back up to the top to our main call to action. So that's what we're doing here. So ahref top, what else do we have to do? Well, let's add a class to make it look like a button, right? btn primary, and also btn large to make it a large button instead of a default one. Start your free trial. All right. And that should do it for the call to action. Let's take a look. Perfect. Finally, we have probably the hardest component of them all, which is the footer, which has a single paragraph. So footer, we'll give it a class of BG light and text center, and inside a paragraph, not brackets, a paragraph that says something like copyright 2018 Bootstrap. All right, let's have a look at that. Okay, copyright 2018 Bootstrap. There's a little bit of a bottom margin on this paragraph, but we'll take care of that with a simple class. Right, so with that, we've actually finished after well, almost 1 hour of live streaming. We've actually finished building the kind of the basic markup for this page. And I think at this point it's safe to say that it's about let's call it 75% done, because all of the markup is there, most of the layout is done correctly, All we need to do is add, our own custom styling, and maybe, just tiny bits of JavaScript if we want extra functionality, and also a better system for or a better spacing for all of the elements. And of course, we have to check the page on various screen sizes to make sure that it's responsive. Now, this completes section number 3 of the live stream. We'll take a 1-minute break. You guys can send over your questions if you have any. And I'm gonna have a sip of water and be right back. Okay, we're back to the final part of this live stream. Let's see if you guys have any questions. Let's see, no questions though, but a compliment from Mo Bean, my favorite instructor. Sir, thank you very much. I'm really happy that you're enjoying the live stream and my tutorials. Much appreciated. So, let's move on to part number 4, where we'll finish basically styling this page. We're not going to style it very much. We're going to make it look like this basically. Just add a little bit of spacing here and there, change a background color here and there, and most importantly, make this or add this extra functionality. All right. So we'll start by, let's see what we should start with. Let's start by adding some extra spacing, because I think the page right now looks just a little bit too crammed, and we kind of need that extra spacing. So let's jump back to our code editor here, and we'll start from the very top. Now, when it comes to spacing, Bootstrap has actually done a pretty cool job. They added special classes for padding and margin. And you can add individual classes for padding left, padding right, top, bottom, or the padding on the x-axis, which is left and right, or padding on the y-axis, which is top and bottom. You can do the same for margin, right? And you can add both padding and margin. And those margins and paddings are calculated based on a, what was that? I think it was called a spacer value. And that spacer value was 1 rem. So for example, padding, or the class of P1 will add padding of a certain value times that spacer. Padding 2 would be a different value times that spacer, and it goes all the way up to 5. Of course, this is all customizable in SAS if you're using the SAS version of Bootstrap. But since we're using the CSS version, we're going to take advantage of only the existing classes that Bootstrap has to offer. So we're going to start by adding a little bit of padding and margin bottom to our elements. I'm going to start with the body because if you take a look right now, the hero area here, or the jumbotron, kind of sits right up there, or the content sits right up there with the nav bar, and I don't want that. I want to push it down a little bit. So I'm going to add the class, let's see, on the body, class of PT5. And PT5 basically means padding top 5. It's not 5 rems, it's not 5 pixels, it's just a class. I believe for this one it's spacer times 1.5 or 2. I'm not exactly sure. I can look into the code for that if you want. But it adds a padding top of, let's see what this is. It's about 48 pixels, something like that. Next, let's move on to the nav. Now for the nav, I want to add a little bit of padding on the left and right. So I'm going to use the class of px, which is padding on the x-axis, 5. I'm using the highest value, and as you can see, these just got pushed inwards by the same amount. Next, let's add, let's see, on the jumbotron, I think we need to add a little bit of margin, right? So I'm going to add margin on the top and margin on the bottom. So jumbotron, I'm going to say MY5, which means margin on the y-axis, so top and bottom, and using the 5 value. And as you can see, that pushed our content nicely further down and also separated the jumbotron from our feature area. What else? Let's add a little bit of padding to these columns, right? They're kind of crammed in here. So I'm going to go to each individual column, and I'm going to add PY5, which is padding on the y-axis. And didn't I save this? Oh, it's on the jumbotron, sorry. So where was this added? Oh, it was added here. Yeah. So on the jumbotron, PY5 added padding top and bottom. Next, let's scroll further down. Let's see where else we need to add. Maybe on the features. So on the features, I also want to add the class of padding Y5 on the actual section. We'll do this on all sections actually. So class, oops, PY5, and let's do the same here on the pricing. Let's take a look. Yeah, so that added extra spacing in between these two elements, and also in between the features and this CTA. It did the same thing for pricing, and I think it's safe to do the same thing for the testimonials. Yep, that looks about right. And maybe also on the call to action here. Yeah, so container PY5, that added extra padding. And maybe on the footer as well. Yeah, so container text center, PY5. That's good. And on the footer, let's actually add a P5, which adds padding all around. Now, since we're on the footer, let's actually fix this misspacing issue here by adding the class of MB0 to the paragraph. MB0 stands for margin bottom 0. And now that extra margin bottom is removed. All right, what else? Well, let's actually start with each individual component and see what other classes or what other styling we need to add to it. And I'm just going to check my notes here because it's a lot of code to cover. So let's see. What I want to do in this case is align this column with this column vertically. Without Flexbox, this would be kind of difficult, but here it's actually quite easy. We're going to go to our nav bar and we're going to say justify content center. And also I'm going to say justify content LG between. Now justify content center will basically align this vertically, and justify content LG between will make sure that these two elements are sitting right on the edges. Now what else? The nav doesn't really need any kind of treatment right now, but we could be, well, actually I made a mistake here. I do apologize. I added these styles to the nav bar, but I was actually explaining on the Jumbotron. Sorry about that. So what happens basically is that the justify content center, as I said, aligns these items properly, and the LG between will align this on this end and this on the other end. Next, let's move on to the Jumbotron. So on the Jumbotron, what I need to do is excuse me, vertically align this element with this element. So for that, I'm going to go to my row and I'm going to add the class of align items center. And that will vertically align this element with this element. All right. What else? Let's add a little bit of margin bottom to this title. So I'm going to say display h4, margin bottom 3. Yeah, it just pushes that down a little bit. And let's do the same for the h3 or the subtitle. I'm going to say MB5 so that it separates better this text from this text. And then on each image, we're going to add the class of MR2. MR2 stands for margin right 2. That's going to create a gap between the actual check icon and the text. So IMG, let's see, do we have a class? We don't. Let's go ahead and add one right now. I'm going to do this change on all images at once. Class MR2. Okay. Just like that. Okay, let's see what else do we need to do. I think this is pretty good for now. Maybe just you know, change the background to a dark one. So Jumbotron. Let's set BG dark and text white, and that should complete it. All right, that's pretty good. Now let's move on to the features. On the features, we added this padding class. Let's also add a margin bottom 5 to the container. Yeah, so it pushes that content further down. Let's also add a margin bottom 5 to this subtitle here. So MB5. And that's going to push this content down. And then on each column, I'm going to add a margin bottom 4 just to separate these rows a little bit. So call LG, yeah, let's get all 4 occurrences, MB4. Okay, and then on each image, I'm gonna add a class of MR3, which is margin right 3. Right, so I'm gonna say img source. Again, I'm gonna use my multi-cursor here, class MR3. All right, and that looks pretty good to me. Let's see, do we have anything else to add here? Features. I think we can get rid of the margin top from these headings, but I wouldn't worry too much about it. It's a question of personal preference, really. This is done and dusted. Let's move on to the secondary call to action. Here, we basically need to add a little bit of padding to this card. So I'm going to add the class of PY4, so or padding on the y-axis 4, and also margin bottom 5, just to push that content down. And also let's separate these two elements a little bit by adding the class of MB4, margin bottom 4, to the heading. And that pushes the button further down. Let's move on to pricing. For pricing, let's see, let's add margin bottom to this subtitle like this, and maybe more margin bottom for the card deck. Yeah, so the distances between these sections are well, relatively equal. I think we're okay for this section. Looks just like it should. And now let's move on to testimonials. This is where we need to add quite a couple of classes to make things work. So we're going to start by distancing the text from the actual quotes. So MB5, margin bottom 5. All right. What else? Well, let's start by let's add a little bit of margin between these two rows. So I'm going to go to this first block and add MB5 just to push things down a little bit. And then on the media, I also want a class of MB5 on each media because on smaller screens, these will be stacked and I want some distance between them. So media, MB5, and also on large screens, I don't want it to have any kind of margin bottom. So I'm going to say MBLG0. That means on large screens and above, margin bottom is 0. And also let's add a margin right to separate these two. So MR, let's also do this for large screens, MRLG4. And that creates the nice separation there. So let's see if we need to do let's also add a class of ML LG4 to this media, so it creates an extra bit of spacing here, right? So we have margins right and left on these two elements, but only on large screens. Now, going back inside the media body, basically, let's see, we need to get rid of the margin bottom here. So on this paragraph, I'm going to say, well, actually on all paragraphs, I'm going to do this so that we save a little bit of time. Oops, I miscalculated that click. There we go. And it's right here. Okay, so I'm going to add the class of MB0 or margin bottom 0 just to get rid of that that margin there. And also let's check out the images, because we need to add a little bit of margin right or margin left to these images to separate them from the block quote. So on this first image, on the actual class, I'm going to say MR4. On the second image, I'm going to say ML4, which is, margin left 4. Yeah, that should do it. And now we just have to repeat the same treatment on the second row of media objects. So let's see. Margin bottom 5 here. And then on this media, we'll go with MB5, MBLG0, and MRLG4. This stands for margin right LG4. Let's also do the image. So this will have an MR4 class because it's the actually the first one. And on the second one, it's going to be MLLG4, margin left 4. And on the actual image, it's going to be ML4 right here. And that should do it, hopefully. Yes, it does. Cool. All right. Let's move on to this bit. Now for the secondary call to action, we don't really need to do that much. Let's add a margin bottom to it. So MB5. What else? Maybe just a little bit of margin bottom to this title or subtitle, just to push down that button. Yeah, pretty cool. And I think we're done with spacing for now. Yeah, it looks pretty good to me. We do have some rounded corners here on the Jumbotron. And let's see, Jumbotron. I think we need to add the class of Jumbotron Fluid. And that will make its width 100%, remove those rounded corners. All right, looks pretty good. Now, let's see about let's see how it behaves, how this page behaves on different screen sizes. So let's decrease the size. This is the mobile size. It starts at 768 pixels. I'm not sure if you can see here. No, it actually starts a little bit earlier. But this is the mobile. This is when our first change happens. And when this happens, notice that most of the content just goes in stacked mode instead of just columns. Yeah. This is looking pretty good so far. The only thing that we need to change here is to basically hide this nav bar. So to hide the nav bar, yeah, we'll go back over here on the top. Let's see, nav bar. What should I hide? I should actually hide the nav. So the nav, I'm going to use the following two classes, dnone and dlg flex. Let's see if that works. And it does. So what is happening here? Dnone basically means display none. So I'm setting display none for every breakpoint out there. But I'm overwriting that on large screens and above by setting display to flex. So on small screens, that just goes away and the logo is centered. But on larger screens, the logo is placed on the side, same as the nav bar, and the nav bar is being shown. All right, Let's see what else. So that was one breakpoint. Let's see if we go like this, very small. Yeah, these look good. Let's go even smaller. And by the way, if you're using Chrome and you're doing an inspect, you have the option to really tap into those responsive modes, just like this. So you can go into tablet mode, you can go into mobile, really small. Of course, you can adjust this manually if that's what you want. You can also, choose between desktop mode, mobile mode, if that's what you want, right? So in my case, I'm just gonna resize this manually. I think we're gonna have some problems over here in this area. So if we go like really small, yeah, notice that these elements are starting to get smaller and smaller, and eventually the pictures just take up too much space. So on small devices, let's go ahead and hide them completely, right? So I'm gonna scroll back down to testimonials, and let me check my notes here real quick. We're gonna do something very simple. Simply add the classes of dnone, just like above, and md block. And I'm gonna copy and paste this to every single image right here, and then right here, and then again right here. Okay, and this basically means display none on all breakpoints, but then starting mid and above, display block. And this will ensure that they are being displayed, the images are being displayed on medium screens and above, just like you can see here, but when we go to small screens, they disappear, and we get the cards at full width, which is exactly what we want. All right, and with that, we've actually checked the page in responsive mode. The spacing is done. Let's go ahead and add our custom styling and see about this menu, which currently, takes us to where we want to go, but it doesn't really create a nice effect when doing that. So I'm just gonna have one quick break, and I'll be right back. And we are back. All right, let's write some custom styling. And for that, we'll be focusing on the navigation, because this is the one component that needs the most work here. So I'm going to open custom CSS, and I'm going to target the body. What I'm going to do here is simply set a position to relative. Oops. And this is required for the Scroll Spy plugin. Now, the Scroll Spy plugin, and this is very cool, will actually detect, if we have a navigation like this, it will detect that we have reached a certain section. So it's going to look the ID of that section, and if it matches the href of one of these elements, it will highlight that element. Very, very interesting. So just position relative there. Let's see about the nav bar. The nav bar, let's see, it doesn't really have a background color. It should have. I guess I forgot to add a class to it. So nav class navbar. Let's add maybe a bg light. That should take care of the problem. There we go. Or nah, bg light adds a gray color and I don't really want that. So let's target that main nav, I believe it's called. Let's see, main, yeah, main nav. I'm gonna simply add a background color of white. Okay, now the navbar itself, let's add a box shadow. And the box shadow is gonna say something like this, 0, 2 pixels for Y, 2 pixels for blur, 0 spread, and I'm gonna do an RGBA value of basically black 000 and 0.1, that is 10% opacity, and that just adds a little bit of a shadow, so the nav bar is more easily distinguished. And it seems we have a little bit too much padding here. Let's see, on the body, so padding top 5, maybe we need to add this to 4. Yeah, that's a lot better. Okay, what else? Well, maybe the image here. Maybe we want to make that a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller. Let's see about the dimensions so far. It's about 60 something. Let's target that. So we'll say navbar brand img. Let's give it a width of 75 pixels. Yeah, that should be about right. Now, let's see about the Scroll Spy. The Scroll Spy plugin, it's really easy to use. You just use data attributes on the element that you want to spy. In our case, we want to spy for scrolling on the body. So we're going to add data spy equals scroll. So what are we spying for? Well, we're spying for the scroll event. And then data target. For this, we're going to say main nav. So where are the elements that we need to update in case we reach one of those predefined sections? It's the main nav. It's this one, right? So now, let's see if this actually works. I'm gonna do a quick inspection here. Yeah, UL. Let's see. Yeah, there we go. So when we reach the first section, which is features, yeah, take a look at these anchor tags with the class of nav link. Yeah, you see they get the class of active. Same happens when we go to the other ones. So when we do that, nothing really happens here visually because we don't have an active class, but it's really easy to add. So let's go down here. We'll say nav link with the class of active, and just to keep excuse me, just to keep things simple, we're gonna add font weight bold, and that will essentially make these in bold when we scroll over each section. Finally, what we want to do is create a smooth scrolling for these elements. So right now when I click on them, they just go to that section, right? But we don't want that. We want them to scroll smoothly to each section. And we're going to use a little bit of jQuery to do that. So let's go back here. Let's open up custom.js, which is loaded right here. And inside custom.js, we're going to do the following. We're going to say function. This is basically a shortcut for document ready. If you've worked with jQuery before, you know what I'm talking about. And then what we're going to do is simply say, we're going to reference navlink, click, and inside we have a function with an E parameter. E stands for event. You can name it whatever you want, but it basically allows you to do this. E prevent default. That means that whenever you click on that link, nothing will happen. So what we need to do is when we click on each link, we want the body to animate a certain property. In our case, it's scroll top. That means the page will scroll nicely to a specific location. So we're going to do this. HTML and body, we're going to animate, and we're going to pass in scroll top, and we'll do something like this. We'll say this, and this refers to the actual nav link that we clicked, dot attr href dot offset dot top. Okay, actually we don't need that, and we'll execute this over 1000 milliseconds or 1 second. So what is this contraption? Well, we basically have to get the top property of the section that's linked to the anchor tag that we clicked. That's a bit complicated. So that's what we're doing here. We're basically getting the href of the link that we clicked. And then we're referencing the element with that ID, and we're getting offset top. Okay? Now, if we're going to do this, let's do a refresh. You'll see that nothing happens. And it took me a while to figure out why this is happening, and it turns out it's because of what Bootstrap is loading here. Having a look at in the footer, we see that Bootstrap is loading jQuery along with the Bootstrap files, the Bootstrap.js, and Popper, which is used for, I think, tooltips and stuff. But be careful here. jQuery or Bootstrap is loading the slim version of jQuery, which is a tiny bit smaller than the normal version of jQuery, but it doesn't contain all of the methods and all of the stuff that you would expect from jQuery. In our case, it doesn't contain animate. So if we're going to use the slim version of jQuery, this is not going to work. Thankfully, you're free to use any kind of jQuery version that you use. So in my case, I'm just going to copy the code from here, and I'm going to paste it in. And here I'm just loading the normal version of jQuery. If you're wondering where you can get that, well, you can simply go to code.jquery.com, and you can grab the latest versions right here. So this is the one that I got, minified, the jQuery 3x. This is the slim minified version that Bootstrap was using. So now, do a refresh. Yeah, we get the behavior that we want. Well, almost, because we still need to take into account the height of our nav bar. So to do that, we'll go to custom.js, and first things first, we'll get the nav bar height. That's actually quite simple to do. We'll create a variable called nav height, and that's going to be equal to nav bar outer height. A simple jQuery method. Now we're gonna account for that right here, where we'll say minus nav height. So we're scrolling to the top position of that section minus the navigation height. And that will make sure that we're scrolling just above where that section starts. But the problem is that this item is not highlighting. If I scroll just a tiny little bit down, yeah, you'll see that it is activating right now. Well, there are two causes for that. One, we need to go back to index.html right in our body tag here, and we need to set another data attribute for the offset. So I'm going to say data offset equals 100 because we also need to account for this top bar. So you'll see that when I reach the nav bar with the top of my section, that's when the link in the nav bar will activate. But then clicking this item, well, it actually works. I thought it would need a little bit more tinkering with to get it to work properly. I thought it needed just a little tiny adjustment here, like a few pixels, but it does work properly. And that's it. Really, that's how you can build a landing page with Bootstrap. We've been going at this for 1 hour and 40 minutes. I do apologize if the stream was a little bit longer, but I really wanted to cover all of these. I really hope you found it useful. Let's go ahead and see if we have any questions from you guys. So let's see, we have one from Ash. He asks, do you think Bootstrap 4 will be used as much as its predecessors, or have other means of front-end coding become more viable? That's a good question. Well, I'm not sure what you mean by its predecessors. Like, you mean the older versions of Bootstrap, or like other frameworks? I think, let me answer it this way. I think these new additions in Bootstrap make it, let's call it a worthy opponent. Well, maybe opponent is a hard word. I don't think it's really a competition here because these are free frameworks. So, you know, you can use either one of them. But I think it would make it more appealing to some people. Let's put it that way. Frameworks like Foundation have had Flexbox and Sass implemented for quite some time now. And Bootstrap, it seems it has jumped on that train. And personally, I'm happy it did that because the stuff that I saw in Bootstrap when building this page for this live stream, you know, actually got me to think that it's really a viable platform for me. I have used Foundation in other projects, and it's totally awesome. I love the build system, but I think Bootstrap with its new build system actually is quite a worthy option to consider. So I don't know if that answers your question. If not, let me know in the chat and I'll try and give you a better answer. Let's see another question. So I think this is a question. I guess the grid in Bootstrap has always been important, but does CSS Grid remove the need for framework grids? Well, CSS Grid is relatively new and people are still catching up to it. It still needs a bit better browser support. Yeah. So I think until it reaches that mainstream state where every single browser that's, you know, mostly used is supporting CSS Grid and people are used to it, I think these framework grids are still gonna be a big part of how people are developing these days. Um, let's see. Question from Brian Fernandez. How to install Bootstrap via npm? Well, it's super simple. You just go to the getbootstrap.com docs, and you'll find instructions here. Let's see. Well, no, it's actually under download. Sorry about that. So Bootstrap CDN, package managers, npm. So you say npm install Bootstrap. It's that easy. Okay, let's see. Any other questions? It seems my audio was off for some reason. Thank you, guys. If you missed what I said earlier, this will be available as a individual course on Envato Tuts Plus. So if you want to see that again, please check back in the near future on Envato Tuts Plus. Until then, thanks again for watching. I'm Adi Pordila from all of us at Tuts Plus. Have a good night, day, evening, whatever it is. Bye.